as per usual when it comes to things like these. I was debating whether or not I was going to do one video or two about this one. Thing is, this isn't quite a typical two-parter. It was split into two parts for later viewings on syndication and whatnot. But it isn't technically a two-parter. It's just functionally a two-parter. There's actually a proper term for this. It's called a feature-length episode. Kind of like how several of the season openers and season enders tend to be. Those are feature-length episodes. Now the thing is, a feature-length episode does contain most of the cost-saving features of a two-parter. I've talked about those before, and I don't feel the need to repeat that now. Excuse me? But what I find interesting is that Star Trek hasn't done feature-length episodes all that often. We have a few, of course, but most of those are season premiere or series premieres or series enders, like I just mentioned. In fact, would it surprise you to know that there have been a grand total of 3 feature-length episodes that are not season enders or season beginners, of which this is the third. 2 of them were actually on Voyager, the other one being Way of the Warrior over on Deep Space Nine, which was, in many ways, a series premiere. But I'll talk about that when we get to Deep Space Nine. They reused a lot of props for this episode, across the board, actually. And on top of that, again, thanks to the whole two-parter thing and how that changes budgeting, this episode did overall save them some money, which is funny when you think about it. But because of the outdoor shots and the significant amount of different locations that had to be shot for this episode. But it's still true, and it makes me wonder, because I've noticed this trend a little bit in Season 7, and it will continue in the future. I did a little looking into a few future episodes. And it's weird because it's like they were trying to save money for some big, saving money for the big finale kind of a situation. The DS9 actually did that for its 7th season. It pulled it cut a lot of corners throughout a lot of the episodes, so more of the budget was available for the last episode, the last two-parter. It's a fairly common tactic, actually. Even if it wasn't the end of the series, even a season ender tends to be something that you want to spend more money on. If you don't understand why that's weird, well, all I have to say is, man, I can't wait till Endgame, and hopefully it'll deliver on that. The directing in this episode's kind of weird. The thing is, it was actually directed by 2 people. They actually did bring in 2 separate directors for this one. The latter half is directed by David Livingston, and it shows. His style is everywhere throughout it. He's an excellent director. I've praised him before. It was Mike Vihar, which I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who did the first half. And the thing is, he's done some great stuff too, especially over on Deep Space Nine. But the directing felt weird in the first half. It felt like it kept trying to emphasize the wrong things. And I have this weird feeling that there was just a disagreement between either the editor or the director or the writer or some combination thereof about where the emphasis in any given shot should be, because it was just unusual presenting. I don't know how to properly describe it. Watch the episode and you'll probably see what I mean by that. So this is just going to be one episode of mine, covering both episodes of theirs. I only have a single page of notes, so I'm just going to go down this in order as per usual. I have to admit, the idea of holograms hiding under wet water makes a lot of sense to me. It's logical. They don't need to breathe, so they can just hang out there as long as they need to, waiting in ambush, right? Unless you, of course, program the holograms to breathe, but as we've already established, they are not programmed for that, so makes sense. The thing is, the overall teaser, if you were to summarize the teaser into a sentence, Hirogen are killed by Starfleet ambush, that sounds interesting, doesn't it? In fact, that just catches your attention immediately, like right off the bat. It's like, oh my god, the Hirogen are back. This is their last appearance, if I'm not mistaken. Their last major appearance, certainly. And they haven't appeared for some time because we kind of moved beyond their space. We've moved on, and yet suddenly they're here, but... And I actually plan to talk about that, by the way. But, so all of a sudden there's Hirogen, and Starfleet officers are gunning them down as the Hirogen are hunting the Starfleet officers. What's going on? Who are these Starfleet? Who are the Hirogen? Why are they here? Why are they fighting each other? There's so many different possible questions and thoughts and ideas that bounce around there, and Of course, it's all for nothing. All of them are fake, but it is an interesting attention grabber, and yet the teaser takes too damn long. It takes forever to get to it. It's just the Herosian walking around, and there's a lot of lines where the pacing is just bad, like actively bad. Like, there's the line where he says there's 4, maybe 5. Except what he says is more like, there's 4 of them. Maybe 5. That's just one example. Almost every line is delivered just a little bit too slow, with far too many pauses, and far too many cuts across far too many scenes, just dragging the whole thing out. And then when the Starfleet officers finally emerge, their death's in slow motion. That teaser could have been like 20 seconds long. Maybe... Let me actually think about that for a minute. Actually, I'm going to say 30 seconds. 24 to 30 seconds long of a teaser I think they could have pulled here. And gotten all the information across. Herosian, hunting, there's 4, maybe 5. Let's go. They're behind us. And then the Starfleet people emerge. Cut to black. You see where I'm going with that? But instead it's like this 2-minute thing that's excessively bloated. But see, here's the thing. I do like Season 7 of Voyager. I think I've made that clear. But it's pretty obvious that at this point in time, the decision-making kind of wasn't. Season 5 and Season 6, both really, but especially Season 5, had a strong feeling of let's try stuff. Let's do stuff. Let's actually make Voyager about something. And I've given quite a bit of credit, probably more than I should have, honestly, to Brennan Braga about that, because he was the one who really took the reins right about then. Season 7 felt more like, let's do whatever. I mention that because the Herosian being here is actually a little bit of a continuity error. It can be explained away, but it isn't. No effort is ever made to do so. And furthermore, it's funny, Sci-Fi Debris, I think, pointed this out. I don't know, it's been a while since I've seen his episode on this episode. I'm talking about his episode of an episode while I'm discussing the episode. We're fully episode-ceptioning here. But it would be very easy to explain this away as if there was like some kind of a jump point or a wormhole, or maybe they'd just gotten signals and they just had to go back a few light years and oh my god, there's this thing and we need to go deal with it. It wouldn't have been hard to make this fit continuity. Furthermore, it is worth noting that all of the writing and executive producers back when they said goodbye to the Herosian, that was intended to be the goodbye to the Herosian. They had no intention to bring them back for any further stories. This went in the face of that. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it does help to explain why this episode overall feels very ill thought out. I am going to make a point to not go down the list here. I have a couple of nitpicks, basically, as I go through here. As I was talking this out, I've decided not to list all of those. The episode's script has issues. Quite a few issues. And most of it, I think, could be summarized by what I just said. It wasn't that well thought out. They just kind of decided, throw together whatever. We need an episode. We've already got these costumes. I mentioned the cost cutting that's going to be happening throughout the next several episodes, and some of the previous ones, actually, too. Just do whatever. Make it happen. Okay, fine. The Doctor asks for some time off in order to be able to go and attend the symposium. Now, the funny thing is, it's easy to sympathize with the Doctor on that one. And of course, I can't help but point out that the Doctor is not getting what he wants in an episode all about holographic rights. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But, I do have to admit, though, that I'm kind of completely on Chakotay's side here. Yes, kind of completely, like 90%. So here's the thing. While I firmly believe in morale and taking care of my people as if they're people, not units or robots, that has to kind of fall to the wayside when it comes to reality. They have a crew of 100 plus, okay? Now, how hard is it, do you think, to imagine that of those 100 plus people, at least one of them wants to do something in just about every sector they pass by? Some personal interest, something that is something they care about, or something that will help them with their career, or whatever, right? If you were to let the ship stop every single time everyone wanted to attend one of the events as they're passing through, you might as well just not have the ship traveling back to the Beta Quadrant at all at that point. You know? At that point, it would also probably get down to a degree of herding cats. I've managed schedules before. It's a pain. You know? So I would not want that job, and I don't really blame Chakotay all that much. It is a bit of a shame. And of course, the funny thing is, the counter argument, and the Doctor himself points this out, is, well, what about what Taurus did? Well, that's actually quite easy to explain, because what Taurus did was fully justifiable. It wasn't just something Taurus was interested in. It was something Taurus was interested in that would also benefit the ship as a whole. That's something that's a little easier to justify the entire ship pausing for this little excursion. Make sense? So, I do like the consequence of giving tech away being discussed here. I like it because it's something that should have been brought up before. Now, anybody who's watched my show for any length of time knows I am very anti-Prime Directive. But, and I will talk about this more probably when we get to TNG or the original series, but a lot of that has to do with the way the Prime Directive is applied specifically in Voyager and Enterprise. And I know what you're saying. There was no Prime Directive in Enterprise, but if you've seen Enterprise, you know what I mean when I say that. So that's what tends to irritate me more. The application of it in the more modern Star Treks just kind of grates on me. It goes back to that old argument. If you see a baby that is in a fire that you can run in and save, and you choose not to because you are not allowed to interfere, I'm sorry, you're the bad guy. That's just my feeling on that. And that pretty much summarizes why I don't agree with the Prime Directive. That being said, this episode does something that they've never really done before in Voyager, and that's discuss why the Prime Directive exists. See, it's not like I'm against the concept to begin with. You do have to very carefully consider what you do when interacting with alien cultures. I mean, really, that should be a duh statement. I shouldn't even have to say that. The idea of trading away technology in order to make things go further? Yeah, that's definitely going to have unintended consequences, and there is absolutely no denying, either because of Mulgrew or because of the writers, or both, that Janeway in this episode is very clearly acting the way she's acting because of guilt. Because she feels responsible for having done this thing, and now, oh my god, this monster has been unleashed as a result. And there could have been some complicated writing there. There isn't, but there could have been. It's like the beginnings of a great idea, storytelling-wise. And I like that because so often Voyager has gone out of its way to say, no, we will never trade our tech, ever. Now that's more the original years, but you get my point. It feels weird to just suddenly be accepting that, oh yeah, we've traded away tech all the time, by the time we reach Season 7. It's also interesting to me that the Herosian managed to push the tech as far as they did. Managing to make holograms that you can't even detect are different. Holograms that have the full range of capacity that they do. Basically, an entire, for lack of a better term, race of sentient and sapient holograms. Now, I've given my opinions on the holodeck and the hologram situation many times, even here just on Voyager, and I'm pretty sure it'll come up in TNG as well, and maybe once or twice in Deep Space Nine. But I mention it here because this to me is actually quite logical. The Herosian are not exactly a stupid race when it comes to technological advancement. They have big ships and they have big guns. They're not that great as far as certain aspects of tech, but that makes sense. Too often people seem to think that level of technology is linear. That the idea of a race being very advanced over here, or not very advanced over here, is out of the question. And I actually like it when Star Trek, or any science fiction really, logically displays a race that is very advanced because of one thing that they have pushed for, like the Herosian, and is very lacking in other ways. And I like that. It's intelligent. It's well designed. So the idea that the Herosian, who are very focused on certain aspects of technological progress, could be able to do this to holograms, which are, let's be honest, basically 1 or 2 steps at most away from making sentient sapient creatures to begin with, that just makes sense to me. That doesn't bother me at all. Now, I feel bad because I feel like I've mentioned this a dozen or so times as we've gone through Voyager. So I actually counted 8 shots. The Herosian hits Voyager with 8 shots total. One of those puts their shields from 68% to 52%. Or was it 67? I didn't write down the first one. It was 60-something to 52%. I actually wrote down the 52%. That's a hell of a barrage, really. Then Voyager shoots back once and disables their weapons. I've talked before about the incredibly, let's be honest, lame action sequences in the space battles in Voyager before. I have gone into detail about how lame they are before. But this one really takes the cake for me because it is literally something that you could have written into the script with a single line. Act 1 action sequence. This is something that is common, very, very common in television in general. Like across a large variety of different types of shows, but especially science fiction. The idea that you have to have some kind of action sequence in the first act to catch people's attention. It's mandatory. In fact, I bet if you look at most movies, you'll see the same damn thing. There are actually quite a few different movies, even Star Trek movies, by the way, that have a Act 1 action sequence. Sometimes it fits. Sometimes it flows smoothly with the story. Sometimes it's just there because you need to have it. And this goes back to that thing that I've talked about so many times with regards to writing. The moment you make something mandatory, the moment you have to have an Act 1 action sequence, that's the moment I feel when creativity kind of starts swirling the drain a little bit. If I have to insert an Act 1 action sequence, you get what happens in this episode. Sir, the Hirogen are here. Da 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 da. Generic action music. And then you remember what I talked about a few episodes ago? Actually, I don't remember how long it's been at this point. But I was talking about how the counting down the numbers is the spaceship equivalent of the red shirt. Things are serious. We're counting out the shield numbers. That's how you know things are serious. Okay, we won. We won. Back to normal music. We're cool. That's all it is. It's effectively a form of padding, really. But and to make this clear, I've had a couple of people come after me saying that I just don't like action in my Star Trek, which is ridiculous and also wrong. What I like is action that either A, makes sense, B, informs the scene, whether it be character or plot or the setting or something, or C, is just well enough done that I could ignore the fact that it's just there to be actiony. One of my favorite scenes in Star Trek Beyond was the scene where they destroy the giant wave of drone ships with some music. I can't remember the name of the song, forgive me, but you know. That was an awesome action sequence. I'm sorry, it was. It was kind of silly. It was kind of stupid. Didn't really do anything for any of the characters. Didn't really advance the plot other than getting from point A to point B. But it was well done. You don't have to have a Star Trek not have action in it. You just need to do something with it. That's always what I'm in favor of. Do something with it. Make it relevant, or make it good, or both. I have a note here. First of all, the Hirogen, with the exception of the scientist, are portrayed kind of like idiots. I'll get to that in just a second. Janeway's actions in this episode are so ridiculous when you really think about it. So, first of all, she tries to work together with the Hirogen. The Hirogen pretty much universally say piss off, and actively have attacked her ship, and actively attack her ship and threaten her ship. And yet one of her stated motivations is her desire to avoid bloodshed. And then there's the fact that she refuses to work with the holograms. I would say she's being diplomatic, but she's being the worst kind of, she's being unreasonable diplomatic. You know what that means, right? When someone comes to you and says, okay, I'll do it your way, if unreasonable demand, unreasonable demand, unreasonable demand. And they portray it as if they're being diplomatic, but what they're really doing is trying to force you to not be diplomatic at all because the terms are unacceptable. I'm sure you have actually experienced that in your real life at some point. Lord knows I have. So then she ambushes the Hirogen. This is fast-forwarding massively. This is like in the last act of the episodes. She ambushes the Hirogen so violently that she basically completely disables them and leaves them helpless to then be massacred. Oh, and while I'm at it, the Delta Flyer then actually manages to disable the one ship that's actually trying to save the Hirogen. And all of this is in the name of avoiding bloodshed. Now, Janeway's guilt, I already mentioned before how that's significant, but most of Janeway's actions don't really make sense if you presume she was written with an actual characterization in mind. Unless you presume she's a bigot. Hear me out. I can't believe I'm even saying this, because this is stupid. There's a scene where the doctor says, where is it? I actually wrote down, it's a race issue. She says, I'm not going to let you turn this into a race soon. He says, but it is! Now the thing is, it is absolutely clear that for the doctor, and for a couple of the others, most notably Iden, this is a race issue. Okay, I can see why they'd take it that way. No judgment. And the Doctor has been very picky about holographic rights many times before, so it's not really that surprise that he'd get a burr up his ass about this one too. Thing is, Janeway, and Voyager in general, has covered this before. More than once. This is Season 7. We've done this song and dance before. Janeway has actually admitted that she didn't think of him as a person. And if you'll remember, I called issue to that then, because even then it wasn't really demonstrably true. It just, all of a sudden, Janeway became a bigot for that episode, became prejudiced, became biased, negative bias, for that episode, so they could have the message of that episode. And then she went back to being normal Janeway, where she was treating him like a person, like she had been before and since. And then all of a sudden, we're back to that in this episode to do the same song and dance for, at this point, at least the third time. Arguably more. So, why? Why is this an issue of race? I'm sorry, why is that even being brought up? Why is that relevant to any of the Voyager crew at this point? 7 years into their journey they've been with the Doctor. They have actively gone out of their way, bled and fought, in a couple of cases died, for him and the rest of their crew. He is a part of their crew, and a part of their family. They care about him. The idea that all of the sudden this is an issue of holographic rights is ridiculous. In fact, there's a line which you could just see Mulgrew spitting out, where she says, I'm sympathetic to those kind of people. And Mulgrew does the line properly, but you can just tell. Watch that scene really quick. Watch Kate Mulgrew's expression and the way she presents it. You can tell she's just kind of forcing the line out. And I wasn't able to find any specific information on this, so this is pure speculation. But it wouldn't surprise me if Mulgrew went to the writers and said, "What the frell? Why am I suddenly this kind of character again?" Now I know what you're saying. Well, hang on, Lore. You just said that this is going to be interesting when we get to TNG, isn't it? Hi, Lore. Hi, Lore. Hi, Data. Hi, Light. Data. Hi, Lore. I mentioned how she ends up causing the death of a lot of Herosian. Well, yeah, because the character arc, and I am saying that with massive sarcastic quotes, for Janeway in this episode is, I'm bigoted! Oh, wait, they're actually people! I'll defend them! And that is basically her character arc throughout the course of this episode. If you really pay attention to it, it's kind of swept under the rug, actually, but it's there. And so her actions at the end do make a lot of sense, because she has basically firmly decided, alright, I'm going to defend those holograms. It's an interesting idea, because if it was written properly, it would be brilliant. And I mean that sincerely. The idea of someone who is biased, but then realizes they're biased and is repulsed by the idea that they are biased and pushes away from it so violently that they do something worse than they were doing before. Overcompensation? That's an interesting story idea. How about a Janeway who by the end coda is torn up over the fact that all of the happenings of this episode are her fault? The sufferings of the Herosian, the sufferings of the holograms, that's all on her. Because she was a horrible person, and then she tried to compensate for that and failed at doing it properly. I mean, think about the dramatic potential there. Now, I want to mention the race thing really quick. It is understandable why this would be a race issue for Iden and the other holograms. It really is. It makes perfect sense. For them, the dividing line was there from the very beginning of their existence. You us. Bam. I'm with that. Wouldn't it have been more interesting from a writing perspective, and to be perfectly blunt, a little more Star Trek-y, if the arc of this episode was, that line isn't there for everybody? If the holograms could slowly learn to trust and work together with organics, as the organics of the Voyager crew have already learned to do the same in reverse. Remember, this is Season 7, and the Doctor is already considered a person. Rewind to that earlier thing. You remember when Chakotay said no to the Doctor's visit? Did he say, no, you're just a hologram? Or, no, people like you don't get time off? No, he didn't say anything of the sort. He said no to him like he would any other officer. Like he would any other member of the crew, for the same reasons he would to any other member of the crew, with the exception of how I mentioned with regards to Torres. Chakotay treated the Doctor like a frickin' person. So imagine that kind of effort of the Voyager crew trying to reach out to these people, not just to help them now, but to help them understand for later. Now imagine the construct of the episode shifting a bit, because now several of the crew of this holodeck ship are wanting to start reaching out and wanting to start trusting Voyager, and then the Hirogen come in and start ambushing them. Oh my God, we've been betrayed, right? No. That would be the typical thing to do. Instead, have it be clear that Voyager is defending them from the Hirogen, and introduce to them an idea that up until now has basically been alien to them. Not all organics are the same. And I know that sounds like such a basic thing, but think about it from their perspective. Up until now, all holograms have been the same, and all organics have been the same. There's been no reason to question that. Voyager crew demonstrating that variance in organics could introduce to them the idea of the concept of the opposite of bias, the opposite of prejudice, because prejudice, by its definition, is prejudging, right? And they have prejudged all organics as bad, because that's what they've encountered thus far. Again, no judgment. But then they see people who are demonstrating the opposite of that. Now they're thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't prejudge organics. The holograms overcoming their own bias on the matter, thanks to Voyager's example. Then we go to Iden, and maybe some of his more malicious people. I'm going to jump way ahead of my notes here. I have a note right here. Iden is suddenly mad. There's no cause for it. Literally, in between commercial breaks, Iden suddenly turns into a mad, raving prophet. He completely is character assassinated in the final act of this episode. It's actually really bad. It's probably the worst aspect of the episode. I kind of like this episode, actually, even though I'm kind of talking about how it should be done better, because there's a lot of good stuff on display. There's some great moments with some Taurus. There's some great moments with the Doctor, and I'll be talking about both of them later. And there's some great moments with the guest characters, who all do a very good job of their roles. But then they just all fumble everything right at the end, and the last act is just a mess as a result of that. Why does Iden suddenly turn insane? Into some, the people will literally bow down and worship me. Insane. Thing is, it's funny that they didn't do the typical thing here. The typical thing, the expected thing, would be that his program's malfunctioning. Remember, they've been having issues with malfunctioning programs since the beginning, since they were first introduced. That's why they brought the Doctor over. Heal us, right? Wouldn't it be interesting if there was some kind of... Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. It wouldn't be interesting if there was some kind of instability in program. That would be the expected thing. Star Trek's actually done that before with a person. Garth in Whom Gods Destroy in the original series was literally insane. He had a mental instability, and when it was fixed, he was back to being an actual person by the end of the episode. Now, that is, again, the typical thing, but at least it's an explanation, as opposed to just, oh no, I've suddenly decided that I am God! And it's not just that's character assassination. He starts acting in a completely different character. As I noted here several times, Iden does a lot of things that demonstrate that he is a complicated entity, that he has layers to him. He is malignant. He is a warrior, a leader, but at the same time he is willing to be peaceful, and he demonstrates excellent diplomatic skills. The way he reacts with Taurus is Perfect example, textbook example of diplomacy. The whole, we're not here. Understood. You can go. We're going to. I'm not asking you to be our friends. I just want you to look at it. It's all good. The way that conversation goes between the first conversation between him and Taurus is perfect. He even, just before that scene, that the characters don't see, but we see, he even says that we need to have trust and faith in them, that they will not let us down. And he goes from that to, I'm not letting you go just frickin' cuz, and also I'm going to murder these people for no frickin' reason. Oh, and also, let's go start massacring people for funsies. A little bit of a difference there. One of the scenes I like most is when the doctor goes to Iden and says, give me your word. You will not use this information to attack Voyager. Iden hesitates, because he knows what that's going to mean to him. But he agrees to it. You have my word. Doctor goes over, battle starts going. They say, weaken the target, the bridge. And that's true. This is actually kind of a big flaw in most of science fiction in general, but at least they acknowledge it here. Without the shields, one right photon torpedo will kill Voyager, because all you need to hit is the bridge. That's the end of that fight. Voyager's out of it, and all those people are dead. One photon torpedo, or equivalent. Iden says, no, I gave my word. We'll try some other way. And they do. They find some other way. I liked that. Where did that character go? He was like written out, and then they made this new atypical, screaming, ranting villain in the margins. So let's talk about this again here. So as I mentioned, how about have the hologram crew slowly learn to not be biased? And as this new information is added to their nets, let's say that it doesn't fit properly. Maybe it doesn't quite compute the same way it does for everyone, because they weren't all adapted or upgraded in the same way. Remember, Iden's not from the same facility. He's from 3 facilities ago, or 4, depending on how you count it. He was a completely different hologram in a completely different area. He comes over. Maybe he doesn't actually have the ability to adapt to that kind of stimuli. Oh, he can adapt to cunning, to traps, or to enemies, or to obstacles. But the idea of something other than an enemy that is not a hologram, and therefore something that he knows in his programming is always on his side, that could create an actual feedback loop in his AI. Have his malfunction actually be a result of him being incapable of adapting in this circumstance. Think about it. How about have some of the other crew go with him, because they were programmed to be vicious, violent brutes? There's this one guy who's a Starfleet guy. He's in a red shirt. I don't think he's even given a name. He has no personality whatsoever. He's just, I want to kill people. Well, why not make that a plot point? Why not make it a point of the story that he literally can't think about anything other than killing organics? That's all he was programmed to do. You could even have this be an initial step for what would later become a development. Remember when they rescue to borrow the sci-fi debris equivalent, the box of hammers, or whatever it is he said? You know, the extremely, extremely basic holograms that they rescue. You remember that? Have the first step of that already be there. Have a little foreshadowing for the fact that Mr. Redshirt over there can't adapt, can't think for himself. He is basically a typical holodeck hologram, not a sentient, sapient hologram. And have Iden refuse to see the difference between the two. Remember, holograms are on his side, after all, because that would also be foreshadowing for the fact that Iden himself is not actually fully sentient and sapient. At least in the way I'm describing it in my revised version. I just realized I've been talking about my revised version for a while. I apologize, guys. Let me look at my list here. What else we got? I do like narratively how the Herosian are initially presented as the bad guys, and the holograms are initially presented as the victims. And over time, even before the stupid moment that I mentioned, even before he suddenly says, worship me! Even before that, attempts are made to make both of them a little more gray. We see a little more of the Herosian side of things, especially with the scientists. Some good directing on that part. David Livingston for the win. So we see a little more of the Herosian fleshing them out a bit. And we see a little bit more of the holograms and how they're not actually all just victims, and they're kind of bastards in their own right too. And it helps to flesh out and just add some layers of complexity to the situation, which I very much liked. I liked, I know I like the scientist. I like how he cares about the situation. As weird as this sounds, I liked how Aiden literally tortures the doctor to gain his trust. I know that sounds weird, but it is very in character, even as he's presented up until the character assassination moment, especially in my version. I do find it amusing that it works. The Herosian take over the comms from the mess hall. I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't point out the nitpicking things, but that is pretty bad. um, I'm sorry. I'm skipping down lists of nitpicks. I'm sorry, guys. Like the deflector dish. We just suffered catastrophic damage to our deflector dish. 4 hours and we'll have it fixed. But that's the outside. If they had Taurus, they'd have it fixed even faster. I like how the doc gets through to Taurus by mentioning the Maquis and how she kind of shifted allegiance from the Maquis to Voyager. I like how you don't really notice it, but Roxanne Dawson subtly changes her performance after he mentions that line. And you could tell, based on her performance, that got to her. That she started thinking about it from that perspective. That's not exactly as unreasonable as it sounds. It is worth noting that the kidnapping thing was kind of horrible and wrong and shouldn't have been done, but that doesn't change the fact that it might have been done for a purpose. And again, at that point in time, Aiden was a perfectly reasonable individual. A little complicated, very violent, but still reasonable. Still a complex character. So there was every reason to believe that he would keep his word, especially since he has demonstrated keeping his word before, even in a crisis situation. That says something. I like how Voyager chooses to hide from the Herosian, by the way. It's a nice trick. I've mentioned before how it's ridiculous that scanners then can reach forever, can't detect a ship, but at the same time, literally hiding in the wake, along with a few sensor tricks on the shield, is probably one of the best ways to make sure that all of the things that your ship puts out is just kind of caught up in the flow, and therefore isn't going to be detected by scanners, especially if they're not actively looking for you. So that actually made perfect sense. That's probably one of the very rare times I've seen Voyager not use technobabble, but instead use their cunning or their intellect in order to think their way through a situation. So definite props there. I also, I guess I only really have one thought left here. And it's a thought about Taurus, actually. I could summarize all of Taurus's character from, if you were to say a line and then really stop and think about it. It's one of those situations. I can't just, it's not a bullet point. What I mean is, this line, if you really analyze it and digest it, helps to explain so much of Taurus's character. It may be the warriors who get the glory, but it's the engineers who build civilization. I hope I said that right. Let me double check. Another one of them, but it's the engineers who build... Oh, excuse me, societies. It's the engineers who build societies. Almost got it right by heart, because it's a very good quote, and I've myself used it many times, and it's absolutely frickin' true. I could talk a lot about that quote. I could talk about how many ways that is true in real life. How often do you recognize the worth of the actors and the directors in a movie, right? How often do you recognize the work of the 20 or 30 people who made that scene look the way it did, who are not the actor and director? And I know a lot of you know what I mean by this. But this especially applies to not only Star Trek, but to the Klingons in specific. There have been very few works that have really touched on this. Just a couple, really, across all of Star Trek. But every time they do, I love it. Because the idea is that the warriors lead the Klingons. But every time it's analyzed, it is made absolutely clear that those warriors would be completely incapable of doing anything, if not for the engineers supporting them. Now, I say engineer as a broad sense. I don't mean literally someone who works on engines. You know what I mean, right? The society builders. The people who made sure they have things like a cloak, or starships, or warp drive, or the disruptors they use, or the cities they live in. You know? All of that came from those society builders behind the lines. And In a lot of cases, those Klingons themselves don't get a lot of glory externally, but a lot internally, because they know they're helping to build the Klingon Empire, as opposed to being some guy on a flag, like Gowron is. I like that line. It is very excellent for Taurus in particular, because, I mean, that is her, isn't it? She has said so many times, I am not a warrior. And yet what she really is in every way an engineer. She is a support. In a RPG, she would be, a buffer or a debuffer behind the lines. Now that person may not get the kind of honor and glory of the DPSer up front, or the tank keeping things off of everyone, but that tank wouldn't have the health or shields he has if not for her buffing him. And the DPSer wouldn't be doing as much damage if not for her debuffing the enemy. Anyone who is worth their salt will recognize the value of such a support infrastructure. The Yellow Mages of Star Trek. And I think that's a really awesome thing that they did that with Taurus. That's actually all I got. You can see why I decided to do one episode about this one instead of two. I don't remember what's next, so I guess I will just go ahead and see you guys next time.